You are listening to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and business. And our guests today are Professor Holly Catalfano and Paul Harrietha. Together, they wrote a book called The Invisible Rules: What's Really Holding Women Back in Business and How to Fix It. And they provide a ready-made model for any woman looking for a career advancement. Professor Harrietha, Professor Catalfano, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good morning, and thank you.
Well,
Yes, thank you very much, Helen.
I'm sure I mispronounced your name. So could you, whoever jumps in first, once again, say your proper name, and then we take it from there.
Paul Harrietha.
Great.
Actually, Elaine, I think you did an amazing job because it's frequently mispronounced my name, but my name is Holly Catalfamo, and yes, I'm really pleased to be here with you and Paul this morning.
Okay, well, Holly, can we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about your background? You are a professor right now. You are involved with students. You are involved in this subject of solving gender inequality. Can you tell us from the beginning, how is it that you became interested in this subject?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for asking. Just a little bit of background about myself. I am currently a professor of human resource management at Brock University. Oh my goodness. Adjunct professor at Brock University, but I'm a full-time professor at Niagara College. I coordinate the human resources degree program. I started out in industry as a human resources professional, and I worked both in the public and in the private sector in the Ontario government, and then I had the opportunity to work for a multinational. And I had a very rich career, and I really enjoyed working in human resources. But I suppose my passion has always been for education, and particularly education in the post-secondary sector. So I transitioned into academia, pursued my doctoral studies, and I've been so fortunate to be a professor for about 17 or 18 years now. One of the things that kind of drew me into gender equality as a area of work and an area of study is some early work that I did about 10 years ago, working in Brazil on an international project. And that project was called the Mulheres Mill program, and I probably have not pronounced it as well as my friends in Brazil would do so, but it was all about gender equality and school to work transition programs for marginalized women working, living in Brazil. So that really drew me into the space of gender equality. Since then, I've continued to work internationally through the college, and very blessed to have that opportunity to do so. Working in various areas, working in the Caribbean, Jamaica, and just recently, I'll be starting a project in Kenya as well. So that has sort of been my journey in terms of gender equality. But like Paul, we both are passionate about creating diverse and inclusive workplaces. And as an HR practitioner and an HR professional, I really believe that the foundation of a positive workplace culture and a successful workplace is equity, diversity, and inclusion. That's probably a little bit more than just turn it over to Paul now.
Okay, Paul, let's hear what's your background on gender equality, or how do you get into professorship anyway?
So that tends to be the fundamental question as we move through this process, as people keep asking me, what does a 50-year-old, 50-plus-year-old, being generous to myself, white female, white male, say I'm so into gender equity, I'm having trouble with gender specifically. White male CEO why am I interested suddenly in gender equity and why now? And basically it comes out of two areas, my own professional experience. So I'm a career consultant and business person, and just prior to moving into this direction was a global chairman of an organization and a CEO of the Omer Sponsors Corporation, which is the design arm of a $100 billion pension plan here in Ontario. And as I was finishing up my doctorate, as someone committed to lifelong learning, I saw an opportunity to study an issue that was key to me and to answer two fundamental questions. One was, why do women remain so dramatically underrepresented at the senior most levels of corporate Canada? And more to the point, what can we do about it? And these issues were prompted by my wife as much as anything, Mary Cover, dear friend and spouse, who is now a very senior executive with the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan in Ontario. But she had a situation in her career, as many women did, where she plateaued for some considerable period of time at a senior management level, that is just below executive ranks, despite glowing performance reviews and promises for advancement, while she saw a number of men, often younger, less qualified, and some who she trained, sort of leapfrog her and her female colleagues to get to the executive suite. And as you can imagine, it was a very frustrating time for her, and a time that we discussed quite extensively. And well, it's a good news story. She got to the very senior leadership levels. It undoubtedly took far longer than it should have, and took way more energy and emotional energy than it should have, and certainly would have had she been a man. So that was the motivation, is to understand why this apparent tendency for women to plateau while younger men tend to have an easier path to the C-suite.
Okay, we will talk about the possible solutions for that. But Holly, in the book, you mentioned at the beginning that you had a female supervisor who thought that maybe you should be home taking care of your kids instead of advancing in your career. Can you highlight that situation and how you overcame it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good starting point. And it's funny because I actually refer to that as sort of an awakening I had early in my career as a young female professional about this gender issue. I remember being in university, taking a course on representativeness and thinking, oh my goodness gracious, by the time my kids are born, this is going to be a non-issue, right? Like I really believed that. And then early in my career, I applied for this managerial position, and I was just off of maternity leave. And I made it to the short list. I was shortlisted with a gentleman who was from outside the organization. I was from inside the organization, and I didn't get the job. And like a good HR professional, you know that a good practice is to reach out and debrief the interview and say, what can I do better next time? And I nearly fell off my chair when this individual said to me, and as you pointed out, she was female, really, Holly, why are you applying for this job and when you should be? And I remember it was one of those aha moments. So this belief I had that I could work hard and make it through corporate success, kind of smacked me in the face, for lack of a better expression. And I think this is a challenge that a lot of emerging professionals, young professionals face, because the question being, well, do I march down to the HR office and put in a complaint, or is that going to kill my career? Or do I suck it up and count it as a learning and try to work harder and prove myself more, which we talk about in the book, the Prove It Again situation. And I guess I don't want to say I'm embarrassed to say, I think that it's, age and stage to some extent for my circumstances. I decided I was going to do the latter. I was just going to keep working hard and keep proving myself. But it really was, as I said, a wake-up call for me that not only myself, but a lot of other women are facing these biases in the workplace.
Wow, so biases, invisible rules. Okay, so the book is called Invisible Rules. And of course, you mentioned that there are two sets of rules, a set of rules for men and a set of rules for women. So Paul, can you tell us more or less what are those invisible rules that most people don't know and how are they applied differently for men and for women?
Great question, and thank you for it. So to find the answers to the questions that we were looking to explore, we actually went to 50 very senior females, remarkable women who had sort of faced the biases head on and managed to navigate them to career success. And so we interviewed them and identified through their discussions what those biases were. Now, there are a number of them, but we were able to sort of summarize it and bring it down to 4 key barriers or biases, fundamental biases, and they are really a function of, Holly mentioned the first one is prove it again, is the perception that women have to outwork their male colleagues and to largely be more highly credentialed in many respects if they're going to achieve same levels of success. And that while men are hired and promoted on promotion or on potential, women have to continue to perform on a sustained basis. The second is the maternal wall, a fairly obvious one, the biological issue where women tend to have disproportionate levels of responsibility for domestic issues, which are really highlighted by motherhood and pregnancy and what happens when you leave the job and try to reintegrate and then to manage yourself forward while balancing family and work responsibilities. The third is an essential one. It's called the tightrope, and there's this perception that women are expected to act and behave in a workplace based on their gender norms. They're supposed to be communal and empathetic and wonderful and nurturing, where men have the opportunity to operate according to our perceptions on a stereotype basis of leadership, which is aggressive, assertive. And the problem is when women assert themselves too aggressively, they're dismissed as unlikable and other unfortunate terms, which may help them from an advancement standpoint, but certainly creates anxiety and personal pressures. If they don't assert themselves appropriately, then they are dismissed as likable but unleader like. So they have to walk this fine line that men don't have to walk. And then the last one is the tug of war, which is really just trying to determine woman against woman, what it is to be a woman in the workplace and how assertive, how feminine you should be, whether you're going to be one of the tomboys and sort of reinforce the male perceptions of dominance and play the game according to their rules, or you're going to assert yourself on a more feminine basis and sort of reject those rules, which can put you at a real disadvantage as we move forward. So they're very significant biases and ones that necessarily impact women's capacity to move forward in the organizations, but more times than not, their willingness over time to continue to pursue leadership positions.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and I will ask you more specific questions about some of those issues. But just before we get a little too much farther, I want to ask Holly, how is it that the idea came together of you two living in different cities and living different kind of professions, how the idea of putting this book together came about?
Oh, thank you for asking that. So I had a very great opportunity to be teaching a doctoral level course at Niagara University in Lewiston, New York. So one of the benefits that I have living in Niagara Falls is that there's a number of different educational institutions nearby. So I was teaching into the PhD program at Niagara University. Paul was completing his thesis, and we had to, or excuse me, he was completing his coursework before he began his thesis. We met and had a strong connection, particularly around our commitment to gender equity. Paul began putting together his committee, his thesis committee, and I was graciously invited to participate in that process. And after he, and I can let Paul speak a little bit more to the process that he went through when he was doing his PhD thesis specifically, but Paul and I sat down after he had successfully defended his thesis and a number of people had said to Paul, this is something that would be an amazing study to share with emerging leaders, with corporate leaders. And we got together and decided that it would be magnificent to extend his thesis, extend the research, and as Paul said, to 50 very senior female leaders and successful leaders in Canada. And that's kind of how the story went. Paul, am I missing anything that you'd like to add?
No, other than Holly said to me after the thesis was complete, you have to turn this into a book. And I reminded her at that time that I was a full-time CEO and that there wasn't a lot of time left in the day to write a book. So I agreed to commit to it if she would agree to commit to it. So
Wow.
the partnership was born at that point, and then we've essentially shared the process, the interviews, the assessment, the academic rigor around the study to produce the book. So it's been a wonderful ride and a lot of fun and enlightening for me, and I hope it will be for the readers.
Okay, Paul, in the subject of invisible rules, I'm not sure, but there's a topic that I don't know if I'm not sure if you mentioned or not. So before COVID, I used to be an owner of a dance school with a female dance partner. Okay, so that got destroyed. We cannot dance anymore. We cannot have a dance school anymore due to COVID. And we went our separate ways, right? Now I'm trying to help my ex-partner to start something new in a field where she's an expert. I don't have the credential. I'm not good enough. I need more training. And in the case of your wife Mary and your case Holly, you were asking for that higher position, but there are thousands of female leaders who feel that they are not ready yet. And they see the male counterpart who have only 30% of preparation, just saying, yes, I'm ready. I know what I'm doing. I learn as I'm, on my way up, while females are just holding themselves back. So I see that as one of the biggest issues, because that's the one that I see almost every day in my surroundings. So I wonder how we can give some of those female employees more courage to, even if they are not 100% ready for a position, to apply for it anyway.
Yeah, that is a huge one, and I will let Holly speak to this because it's a passion of hers particularly. Is we do know, sorry, Holly.
No, please, Paul.
Is we do know from the studies, and part of the issues that we're dealing with is that women, again, are socialized from very early ages to be passive and not to pursue things too aggressively. And it manifests itself in the workplace ultimately with this perception that they have to be fully qualified for any position at any time before they can put their hands up and pursue it. And there's a fabulous story in the book that Rosemary McLean, who's a CEO in the financial industry, said at one point she had sent out a notice based on a restructuring that would create 3 new senior positions. And she says within 6 minutes, and she checked her watch, 3 men had shown up at her door to say, I want the job. And one of them actually was quite indignant and said, why didn't you just give me the job? And the women at this point all sent their emails and wanted to understand better the situation and whether they were qualified and all the other elements. And what we've discovered as we go through this is that there's a true rationale for it. It's not just socialization, but there is a realization based on the invisible rules that men are likely to be accepted in those positions based on their potential, where women have learned to distrust a system because unless they fully qualify for a job and just knock it out of the park, they're unlikely to get the job, which becomes deflating. So until we alter the system, so yes, we can train women. There's a great line in the book that says, when it comes to gender equity, women need coaching, men need education. So yes, there are ways to coach women through some of these things, but the secret ultimately is to alter a system that allows these women not only to put their hands up, but to have a situation where they're prompted to put their hands up by the senior leaders who in fact want to see them advance. Holly, this is an area that
and Paul, you did such a nice job explaining that. The only additional thing that I would add through our research that really struck me is that men are promoted, or what we found is that men are promoted based on potential. Women are promoted based on a proven track record. And that goes to that whole idea about prove it again, prove it again, prove it again. And so I think that, and I suspect that we'll be talking a little bit about some of the solutions down the road, but one of the things that we have to really rethink is our selection processes, our promotion processes, to make sure that they truly are neutral when we're looking at male candidates and female candidates. Because if we are saying, I'm going to promote Paul based on his potential to be an exceptional fill in the blank, then a female, Holly, should have that same opportunity. And so I think that that's one of the reasons where Paul said women have come to distrust some of the systems, and they get that checklist out when those jobs are posted or those opportunities, and they say, well, I've got 60%, 70% of the qualifications, maybe that's not good enough. And we've got to really start looking at that from an organizational perspective to wipe out those biases.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So the book, it's in great part about these invisible rules, but then you offer a CAPS leadership framework, CAPS. I guess, can one of you describe what is that leadership framework?
Okay. And I'd just like to share that when we were working with the leaders, which was such an honor, big shout out to those 50 incredible senior female leaders, but they talked about how they by sharing their stories, they helped to see us how they navigated those invisible rules and those big biases. And they do attribute their success to credentials, adaptability, profile, and support.
Just for the listeners, so you interview 50 female executives and ask them all these, from those interviews, you got this conclusion, right?
Yes, absolutely. It helped us formulate a way of seeing the experiences and communicating those experiences. So we really feel that the CAPS framework provides a blueprint of sorts, if you will. We try not to be too prescriptive because everybody's situation obviously is individualized, but we do see that there are absolutely common themes amongst all of our leaders. And the CAPS framework, we're very affectionate towards the CAPS framework. And I'd be happy to explain it, just take a few minutes to explain it. So when you think about credentials give women credibility and also a voice at the table. So sometimes we talk about credibility, credentials being sort of the ticket to the dance. The adaptability piece, as Paul said, it helps to navigate with respect to those biases, the balance. By being adaptable, you can balance that stereotypical assertive behavior, which we traditionally think of as male, with behaviors that are more communal, which we typically think of as female. And then when we talked to our leaders, they said quite clearly, adaptability isn't easy, but it is a competency that you have to harness, that it's critical for success. Excuse me. They also talked about the need to cultivate profile or a very strong personal brand, and the need to be very deliberate around seeking opportunities to showcase your skills and abilities, not only within the organization and within the department, but certainly beyond the organization as well. And then the final part of the CAPS framework is support. And, you know, universally, our leaders said that they would not have been able to do it without a number of different sources of support. First of all, their support from their families, whether that be a partner, whether or not that be a spouse, whether or not that be parents. They also talk about the critical importance of support from an organizational perspective. And again, there's a lot of things organizations can be doing and can be doing better around that whole support process. They talked about what I suppose we've nicknamed it outsourced support, but the willingness to say, it's okay to have somebody come and clean my house and free up some time for me to spend time on other prioritized items. It's okay for me to have a babysitter or a nanny or to hire a gardener or whatever it happens to be be able to focus my energies where they are truly valuable, whether that be a family focus at a given time or whether that be a work-related focus. And then finally, the importance of sponsorship within organizations. We all know how important mentors are. Sponsors are a little bit different than mentors. They're similar to mentors in terms of they're there to give you sage career advice and guidance, but sponsors are willing to put their reputation on the line for you. And I know that, Paul, we've talked about this a lot. You've had some really amazing sponsors in your career, and I have as well. But these are folks that are going to help you build that profile within your organization and beyond.
We like to say that ultimately people don't climb the corporate ladder. They're dragged up it by the scruff of their neck by people who believe in them and want to see them succeed.
Paul, from your point of view as a male, how can we guys be better support for our female co-workers? I mean, half of the burden, or we are part of the solution. So how can we cooperate on that?
We may be more than half of the solution. We're certainly most of the problem. And I think that was part of the findings of the book, is that, you know, it made me, this study, rethink my positions and what I had done as a senior executive through the process, and realize that I had sort of adhered through my hiring practices, promotion practices, and other, to sort of the conventions at play, which were really reinforcing the patriarchy that existed. And I'm not alone. I'm a reflection, I think, of male executives. So what we discovered as we went through the book, and there was a couple of great lines that said, look, this is not a female problem. If it were a female issue, it would have been solved a long time ago. If we're going to fix this, we need to do it collectively. And what struck me as I was working with Holly on the book is that I was just blatantly oblivious to the biases that existed, and therefore the impact that those biases were having on women in their pursuit of higher level positions. And so as I went through that, that became a negative from my perspective. It also became a real positive, because I think ultimately this lack of awareness is something that can be overcome. And part of what we're trying to do in the book is to educate men about these situations and to build their awareness. And once they become aware of the circumstances, then we can start to move toward advocacy. So yes, educating men and helping them understand how their actions are impacting women and creating an unlevel playing field, that I think we can begin to move forward in fairly short order to rectify the situation and to make gender equity a business imperative.
Okay, in regards to gender equity, in 18, women were not allowed to vote. And of course, we have made some progress from there on to now. And the main problem is that the progress has been extremely slow. But nevertheless, there have been some kind of progress. I wonder if you could highlight some of the places where we are achieving gender equality, where women are rising up, or with less opposition.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I agree. And I think about this a lot as I reflect upon my career, and as I told the story earlier about being in university in my undergraduate, thinking that this problem's going to be fixed, with the next generation. So, and when I also think about, we've really been focusing, we've really been focusing on this from sort of a a social awareness for highly aware of this for about 50 or so years. So yes, we have, I think there's a line in the book that says we haven't quite broken the glass ceiling, but we've cracked it. Elaine, which is, I think what you're making reference to. I think one of our successes is that we're talking about it a lot, and we're talking about it now more than ever. So I'd like to, I'm very much a glasses half full kind of a person, and so I see that as a win. It's a discussion that's taking place across organizations across Canada. Are the numbers there? No, the numbers aren't there. The numbers are still showing us, and I do like to refer to the statistics properly, but we've got less than 4% of the top 100 companies have females. And we also have
in CEO positions.
In CEO positions, I'm sorry, Paul. And of the top paying jobs, only 10% of them are held by women. So although there's much greater awareness that we're having these conversations, that a lot of progressive organizations have made equity, diversity, and inclusion a top priority in 2021. And we're hearing that from a lot of our contacts. One of the things that I think is a really neat initiative is the federal government has a 50-30 challenge right now, which they've put out to organizations across Canada. And there's about 1,100 organizations that have signed up, committing to have 50% of gender equity on their boards and senior executive ranks, as well as 30% representation of underrepresented groups as well. And so we're starting to see those concrete commitments. Paul, do you want to jump in where you're seeing successes as well?
Yeah, so where Holly's glass half full, I tend to be a little more glass half empty, a little cynical, because I look at the numbers too, and the feedback that we had from a lot of the senior leaders is, yes, organizations are building awareness internally and are focusing on equity and inclusion and gender equity specifically as key discussion points within the organizations, but we're not seeing it at the C-suite and board levels. In fact, there could be an argument that we've actually regressed in some areas based on the recent retirement of a number of senior women. So we talk about a lot of smoke, not enough fire yet, and that's what we're trying to do with the book as well, is we'll know that gender equity is a business imperative when you see balanced C-suites and balanced boards. And until that happens, I think we'll continue to have a lot of talk, a lot of policy discussions, but we will not in fact see gender equity until we ultimately change our mindsets, mostly male mindsets at the most senior levels of organizations.
Well, okay, so I think this is a book that applies to everyone, not only for female who are looking to go farther in the career, but this is a topic that we all should be constantly revisiting. So I wonder if you could just one last time mention the title of the book and where can the listeners follow you individually if they wish.
Great. So the title of the book is The Invisible Rules, which is available at Amazon and Indigo. We have our corporate website, which is capsleadershipgroup.ca, capsleadershipgroup.ca, and obviously there's a link to the book there as well. We do have a LinkedIn page, and we'd love to see you join us on LinkedIn. That would be fantastic. Again, CAPS Leadership Group is where you'll find us on LinkedIn. And we also have our own personal LinkedIn accounts, which would be Paul Harrietha and Holly Catalfamo as well.
Anything else last to say, Paul?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank you for helping us bring this to the table. We do have a number of speaking events coming up and corporate sponsors who have been very generous in their time and support of the book and messaging. And so we would welcome an opportunity through any medium with any group to tell the story. We're going to become a little evangelical about this and happy to speak to anyone at any time. So Hélène, thank you so much for your time and support. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Hélène.
Thank you. And unto soon.
Thank you so much.